What's up guys and welcome back to Moaning. If you guys are new here, then what is up? My name is Erica. Hiya, how you doing? If you're into the history of the ancient Greeks and the Romans, maybe you're just into the mythology, and maybe you're just here because, you know what, actually I don't know why you're here on this video because genuinely nothing happens in this book. But anyways, if you're one of the poor sons that has been sent here by your school, or maybe you're just reading the book or something like that, well then you guys are going to want to hit that subscribe button and the bell icon so you know every single time I post in the future. But on topic of today's video, and as you can see from the title, we're going to be going into book 14 of Homer's Odyssey. So if I could summarize Homer's Odyssey into a one sentence, it would be that Odysseus tells the longest lie of a story that has ever been written down. Genuinely, it is one of the longest pieces of crap you will ever have to read, consciously knowing that it doesn't actually benefit you in regards to the story. That's the wild thing about this episode. Like, as you're reading it, you know you don't have to retain any of this information because it's not true. It's so weird. Let me just roll into the narrative so that you guys can like make sense of that. So where I left you guys at the end of the last book was that Athena leaves to go to Sparta to talk to Telemachus to tell him to come home now. And Odysseus is now in disguise. He is dressed up as a beggar and he was instructed to go to the swineherd. So the swineherd is this guy called Eumaeus. And so he has to go and talk to him before going home to the palace, which is a smart idea because otherwise the suitors would have killed him. Not good. So he goes to talk to Eumaeus, and as he's approaching the hut, as he's approaching Eumaeus' home, we get this description of who Eumaeus is without Eumaeus having to tell us. That Homer tells us that he's the swineherd, but he has his own men, he has his own like servanty slave people who work for him to also mind the other pigs, because there are like, oh my god, there are so many of them. I think later on we actually get a number of them. There are like 300 or something pigs, right? We're not talking like a little pig farm, right? This is like a whole pig operation on Ithaca. So he's got his men who do that. We also get a description of what the hut looks like. We get a massively long description of the goddamn walls. I mean, like, even as you're reading it, you're just like, I don't care this much about rocks. Like, I don't. And they tell you how beautifully they're crafted and how amazing it is considering he's like a servant, a slave, and all of this. Whatever. If you needed any of that description, go to the book. I'm not describing it here because we will be here all day if I do. So when Odysseus approaches, Odysseus in disguise, when he approaches, he sees Eumaeus fitting his sandals to his feet because obviously he has to go out and, you know, work. And this is right off the back end of him having sent all of these pigs down to the palace so that the suitors can eat, because remember, the suitors are literally eating them out of home, okay? So that's his job basically, and has been his job for the last couple of years, that he has been, you know, taking care of these pigs and then sending the best ones down to the suitors so that they can eat them. But it's all because of Eumaeus, and if Eumaeus wasn't there, then like the suitors would have starved by now, and like, would that have been such a bad thing? I don't really know. So Odysseus walking forward though, we still haven't got to him meeting Eumaeus. I'm so sorry, that was such a tangent. He goes over to Eumaeus as he's tying up his shoes, but as he's walking, the dogs that are used to round up all the pigs, they start bounding forward towards Odysseus. Now, luckily for Odysseus, he obviously knows the dogs and he obviously knows how to handle the dogs. And so he immediately like drops his staff that he was given by Athena, drops the staff, he drops to his knees and he just like looks at the ground because he knows he has to be submissive to these dogs because they are terrifying. But just in the nick of time, Eumaeus stands up and he closes the gate on the dogs, and Eumaeus turns around to Odysseus in disguise and says, "You are lucky because one more second they would have ripped your head off, so you're welcome." He then launches into this like rando speech to this rando dude about how bad he feels for Odysseus because Odysseus isn't home yet, and he just starts telling this stranger seemingly about how much he loves his king Odysseus, about like how much he misses his king Odysseus, which I do think is a little bit odd considering he doesn't know this person at all, and he's just like, "Here are my greatest fears. My fears are that Odysseus will never make it home." And you're like, Eumaeus, chill. But he does then tell Odysseus in disguise that he should come into his little hut so that Eumaeus can, not Odysseus, so that Eumaeus can make him a meal and Odysseus can tell him who he is and where he's from and all of this, because he has just sort of said that Odysseus is wandering the earth as a stranger, he's wandering the earth as a beggar like this guy, while they all eat the pigs and how the suitors eat the pigs and all of this. It's just like very bad comparison. So he's like, "Come inside, come sit at my table, let's chit chat." So Odysseus heads inside. Eumaeus shows him to this seat, which is like not glamorous at all. It's just like made up of like brush and all of this sort of stuff, right? Typical what you would expect from an ancient swineherd. Like, this is literally what he does. He like brings him in, he sits him on this questionable seat, and Odysseus is really thankful, and he does tell him how thankful he is that he has been accepted and received so politely and so hospitably, which Eumaeus turns around and he's just like, "It would be so wrong of me to refuse a traveler because all of them, all guests, all beggars, everybody from afar is sent by Zeus and is guarded by Zeus. So it would be rude of me to not act this way," which is a sentiment that was said in the Polyphemus episode in book 9. That is something that Odysseus had explicitly said to Polyphemus, not the Polyphemus game. but it is just something that they believe on Ithaca, and so that is emulated, and that is done again by Eumaeus here. Again, Eumaeus sort of launches into this thing where he believes that Odysseus is dead, he believes that the gods have barred his way home, and again, he's telling the stranger just all about Odysseus, and I question if anything else has gone on in his life for the last 20 years, because I just feel like this is a very odd conversation, but I mean, it's needed for the plot, obviously, but I just think that it's a very odd back and forth considering you don't know this person, all you're gonna do is fangirl about your king who you think is dead. And like, he's certain, he is 100% certain at this point that Odysseus is dead, and he relays it to Odysseus in disguise, being like, I know that he's, you know, being buried in the sea, he's being eaten by all of these animals, all of this sort of stuff. Like, he's not coming back, he's not coming home. Eumaeus then walks over to the pig pens, he then picks out 2 of the pigs and he brings them in to slaughter them for Odysseus and to make them some food. And again, Eumaeus fangirls about Odysseus. Literally all he does this whole book is talk about how much he loves Odysseus. And so he then again accentuates how like no other king has had as many riches as Odysseus, and like all of this sort of shebang, just gassing him up to Odysseus in disguise. But he does accentuate how unfair this is in regards to the suitors being there, because he says that now they have to give off all of the best swine, all of the best pigs to the suitors to eat, and they only get this like, you know, the crappy little pigs, like the ones that don't have a lot of meat on them. That's the one that they get to eat, or the ones that they get to eat. And so he says, you know, like, that's not even all that fair, because they are literally letting the suitors live whilst Odysseus perish somewhere else, and they have to keep giving them the good pigs, even though, you know, they're like not starving, but they're not doing too well being like the swineherds of the frickin' island. So at least this speech sort of wraps up to be relevant. So he's saying this as Odysseus is eating, and then finally Odysseus sort of finishes up and he pours some wine into a bowl, and then he hands the bowl over to Eumaeus to drink from first, and he just says, you know, how thankful he is again, and like, you know, you're a great host and all of this. Meanwhile, internally plotting exactly how to kill the suitors, because obviously he can't say that out loud because he, you know, I mean, Eumaeus doesn't know that he's Odysseus, so internally he's just like, how am I going to kill these evil men? Whilst also handing over this little thing of wine, being like, thank you so much, oh my god, thank you. And Eumaeus does receive this very well, and he turns to Odysseus and he says, okay, now is your chance. Odysseus in disguise. He says, now is your chance to tell me who you are, where you've come from, and all of this. Which again, this is normal hospitality practice that you would expect a guest to be entertaining you with stories whilst you entertain them with food. Now, before Odysseus launches into this absolutely ridiculous story, that he actually asks Eumaeus the name of the person that Eumaeus had mentioned in one of his various speeches, that like this great man went to Troy and he clearly perished there and on the sea and all of this. And so he asks now, what's the name of that guy, because I might know him. Now Eumaeus tells him, I mean, as much information as like you really need, that he basically tells him who Odysseus was and how actually his family have all been tortured, including Eumaeus. They've all been tortured by strangers coming to Ithaca who have been falsely saying that they know Odysseus is coming home and that they've met him and all of this. So they've actually had people like Odysseus before, Odysseus in disguise, coming through and saying, I know Odysseus and I know that he's this great man and that he's coming home, all because they want to be treated really well on Ithaca. And so because they've been fooled a number of times, Eumaeus is wary about giving too much information to Odysseus in case he's just going to relay it back and lie to him again. Because poor Eumaeus, I don't think he can handle that again. Like, we've seen how much he loves Odysseus, and so for him to go through yet another lie, oh my god, it would probably break this little man's heart. But Odysseus in disguise obviously does tell Eumaeus, like, I actually know Odysseus, and he is definitely on his way home, woohoo! But also says that he doesn't expect any special treatment, he doesn't expect any gifts in regards to, like, clothing, because remember, he's wearing rags. He doesn't expect that, he doesn't expect a room to board, like, none of that sort of stuff until Odysseus returns home, because obviously he's Odysseus, so he knows he's going to return home. But he's like, until that happens, you don't have to gift me anything. Like, I'm not here asking for special treatment just because I know that is fact, even though you're certain that he's dead. Eumaeus then replies and says, that's good news, because I was not going to give you a reward anyways. Which is a little bit of like a backhanded thing, but like, I appreciate Eumaeus standing up for himself in this moment, gotta say. Regardless, he flatters Odysseus a little bit more, like real Odysseus, by saying that he has like this great build and all of this, and how even though Penelope, what was that? Penelope even, that even though Penelope and Telemachus weep for Odysseus, that so does he, that Eumaeus also weeps for his master from day to day. And so again, he stresses to Odysseus in disguise, like he asks again who he is and where he's come from, if he's so certain that Odysseus, the real Odysseus, is coming home. Now, this is the biggest load of bollocks that you're ever gonna read. So Odysseus then starts off by being like, of course I'm gonna tell you the truth and nothing but the truth, like blah blah, I'll just tell you the story from start to finish. And then he just spews the biggest load of you've ever read. And it goes on for pages, guys. Like, as you're reading it, you're just like, what was the point of this? Like, why did Homer write it in this much detail for me? Like, why was that needed? And I know there are going to be people in the comments that are like, well, it's important to show you how smart he is, that he came up with this on the spot. That part I get. I just mean I don't understand why it's in there anyways. Like, could it not have just been like, Odysseus then started to tell this story and lied to the swineherd in order to protect his true identity? Like, you could have just done that. And Homer was like, nah, okay, we're gonna spin this whole new story and I'm gonna have fun with it. And it's absurd. Like, it literally goes back to the whole, like, Crete thing where, like, he was from Crete and he went to Troy and he met Odysseus there and how Odysseus was like this great hero. And I'm gonna stress right now, you don't need to pay attention to this. I cannot imagine that you're going to have to know this for school. Like, when I even studied the Odyssey in school, we didn't even study this book. Like, we had to read it, but it wasn't in any of the exams. I never used book 14. I think I read it once in school because I had to. And then the rest of the time I focused on books that actually things happen, not like this kind of fake. So read it, but don't pay too much attention to it, because even this story is just like, it's complete bollocks. And again, you don't have to know it at any point, and it doesn't pop up in any other surrounding mythology either. That is super important, that it's not like it comes up elsewhere where people reference how Odysseus had created this great story. Never. So read it to say that you've read it to say that you know that it's a load of crap, and then close the book and put it away. That's my advice. Anyways, the story is so wild that even Eumaeus has to like cut in at one moment, and he's just like, this is insanity. I cannot believe that you did all of this. Like, he even tells him at one point that he had like traveled down the Nile and all of this. And Odysseus then goes back to the madness of the story and finishes it off by just saying, that's why I know that Odysseus is coming home and blah, blah, blah. As he's closing up the little lie of the story though, one of Eumaeus's other men is walking all of the pigs into their little pen, right, after being out in the fields and, you know, living their like best pig lives. So they all come back into the pens, and Eumaeus shouts for him to pick some pigs to come back inside so that all of them can eat together. Like him, Eumaeus, the Odysseus in disguise, that was who I was talking about, and the other men. So he brings in this 5-year-old pig. Like, I don't know why we have to know it's a 5-year-old pig, but we do get that note, so I'm telling you guys. He brings in this 5-year-old pig. They then, you know, cut it up, they slaughter it, they eat it, they have this whole feast between all of them, like all of the men who work on this little pig farm, and then the night comes about, and so then they all go to bed. So as they're all getting tucked into bed though, Odysseus sees this as his chance to test Eumaeus yet again, which I feel like my man, the little swineherd, has proved himself enough. Like, he has said he loves Odysseus multiple times, he has shown his appreciation, he has shown his loyalty. Why we need to test him again, I'm not really sure, but he decides we're gonna do it again. So as they're all getting into bed, because the swineherd has obviously made Odysseus up a bed on the floor. The swineherd was going to go and sleep outside, and then the other men all sleep sort of in the same situation as Odysseus, with just like a bunch of things stacked on the floor for them to lie on. And as he goes to lie down on the bed, he mentions the story, this lie again, of a story of how when he was in Troy, that there was one really cold night, because it was really cold this night, the present night moment, because, you know, Zeus is like sending all of these winds and all of this, and so Odysseus in disguise is like, there was one night in Troy that it was very cold like this too. And he talks about how he had gone to the real Odysseus and it said that he had left his cloak, his cape, in his tent because they were like moving forward against the Trojans. He forgot in his tent because he didn't think it was going to get that cold, but it was really cold, so he was asking the real Odysseus for help. The real Odysseus was like, yeah, sure, I got you, but I need you to like stop talking because the enemy could hear you. And so then he ends up like telling everybody that they have to go and run back to the ships in order to relay information to other people. Thoas, if we remember Thoas, either way, he gets up, and when he gets up to run back to the ships, he leaves his cloak, and so Odysseus in disguise can take that and sleep with that back in Troy. And this story was just there to sort of be like, look what the real Odysseus did for me. Like, can you do something like that? Because I'm cold in my rags because I'm now a poor beggar. And Eumaeus' response is actually well funny, because Eumaeus just goes, yeah, okay, that was a great story, but at the same time, like, you're in a servant's house, you're in a slave's house, so we only have enough cloaks for like one per person. And also, it doesn't make a difference. He actually highlights this, that it doesn't make a difference because in the morning he would have to take the cloak off anyways, because again, there's not enough cloaks for enough people. So he's like, you would be back in your rags, you'd be cold again, you might as well just get used to the weather in your rags. And he did give Odysseus a blanket for bed. Like, it's not like he just sort of left him like bare-legged in the middle of the field or whatever. Like, no, he's got a blanket and everything, but he just explains very politely, Eumaeus explains, that he has nothing to give Odysseus in disguise in this moment. And so Odysseus settles down into bed. The other guys then, they all sort of set up in the room as well to go to sleep. But Eumaeus himself goes to sleep outside with the pigs because that's where he prefers to sleep, because he loves the pigs. I want to highlight that it's not him sleeping with the pigs because he has nowhere else to sleep, that Homer is highlighting that he cares so much for the pigs because he cares so much for Odysseus and for Odysseus's, wealth and for the things that Odysseus has, that he wants to sleep by the pigs in order to guard them, and that's where he feels the most comfortable. So that is the end of the book. And genuinely, I'm just going to end this by saying this again, it is probably the book that you need to know the least in the whole of the Odyssey. I understand that reading everything in order is important, but this book in particular, like book 14, is not. It's not one that you will ever be asked about. It's not one that you will ever be quizzed on. Literally no one has ever said, do you ever think about Eumaeus in book 14? No, but we'll be seeing you next time with book 15 here on Moaning. So see you then.